Hello! Welcome on back. It is Arathio back here today, going through the final, probably final tier list for Pikmin 2, and it's going through the actual Pikmin 2 boss tier list. Yeah! This time around, we're going to be going through a similar tier list to what we saw last time, except instead of it being for the caves, we're looking at specifically the bosses. And of course, this list, a little bit subjective, a lot of bit subjective, more subjective than the other two, I'd probably say. Because I'm looking at these both off how much I liked fighting them every time they appear in the game. So we're not looking at specifically for the King Breadbug, his arena. Because we have to take into account the other one time that he shows up, even though it's not that serious. We're talking about like challenge levels here too. So like wherever these guys show up is what we're taking into account here. But in addition to that, it's how fun they are to fight, how cool they look, and how much I personally like them. Or how much I hate them. So that brings us to number 1, the Empress bulblax. This big juicy kahuna is the first boss you come across in the game. And honestly, for how it operates, the first one, we're talking about before it starts shatting out little hellmongering peasants. Just the first one, where it just rolls back and forth. Now, the fight itself, I've talked about this before already. The fight's kind of lame because you can kill this thing without losing any Pikmin the first time around. Even before you fully get the gist of it. Like, again, maybe the roll will surprise you a little bit. But it's an easy fight. It's such an easy fight. Especially if you have to face it again in challenge levels once you've already dealt with it in the real game. Breeze. I'm actually going to be putting it in B tier, which may sound way high. But the reason why I place it there is just from the role it plays in the game. Because you don't see it all that often. It's not an overused boss like certain other bosses are. You don't see a ton of them. It's your first introduction to the bosses in the game. This thing is huge! It's your first intro. And for that alone, I'm putting it just in B tier. Just because it represents hell the game is going to put you through. Moving on to the next one you're going to find is going to be the regular Burrowing snagret. And it's one of the most used bosses in the game. Again, in its first fight is a little bit special because you haven't really come across something like this yet. You run into it like 50 times in the snagret hole. You run into it another 50 times until you reach the wistful wild. But at the same time, it's this weird benchmark. Again, I have this weird appreciation for it because I actually really like the design of the Burrowing snagret. Like, it's something that I almost feel is kind of iconic to the game itself at this point, partially out of annoyance, but at the same time, like it serves a decent purpose of introducing you to, oh, this is going to be a bitch level. And I appreciate that. And number 3 is going to be the Beady, long legs. Now, it's kind of just a metal orb with some little spider legs coming down from it. It's not even like an actual spider. Again, its original instance is kind of lackluster. It's super slow moving. It's really easy to dodge. It has a very low chance of killing your Pikmin unless you're just not in tune with the game itself. But the other appearances where this guy gets a little bit of a boost for me, because normally I'd honestly throw this thing in D tier. Because I think it looks goofy as heck, and I don't think the boss fight is super intuitive. But when you're on the perplexing pool, and this guy falls down from the sky, probably while you're fighting a bugbear, he can put the fear of God into you. So just for that alone, I'm elevating him up from the bottom. We're just going to stick him right into a comfy little C. Now, after this point, the King Breadbug. And this one is probably going to be my most controversial. But I mean, just look at him. He's just a big cute loaf of bread. He can't even kill your Pikmin unless you try to fight with him. He's like the true pacifist. He's just there having a good time. Let him have a good time, man. What's the matter with you? Which brings it to, honestly, probably one of my most disappointed bosses on this list, which is the Emperor bulblax. You see him like 50 times throughout the main game and the challenges themselves, and he's like a fodder boss. He's the same thing as the Burrowing snagret, but there's less surprise because you know where he is, and you can just murder him with purple Pikmin before he even gets out of the hole. And they usually put him around bomb rocks too, so he can just blow himself up. You can kill him even easier. Compared to Pikmin 1, like, he literally got downsized big time. He had one of the biggest glow downs in history. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to put him in C just because the boss fight's easy. He's no longer as impressive as he used to be, which I think is the most egregious violation he's committed. And so I got to stick him down there. I'm sorry, buddy. Which next on the list, we're talking about the Raging Blister. And this is another guy where I'm not really that entertained by a big blorb with 2 stalk eyes and a little bit of fruit popped out the back. He doesn't really look that crazy. He sounds pretty good. So I'm not going to put him any lower than like a D than the bottom, because honestly my floor here is going to be D tier. So I'm not going to put him lower than that. But I'm definitely not going to put him any higher because he's so easy. He's literally designed to be a cheesable boss. Well, maybe if they made the room smaller to fight him in, it'd be a little bit more exciting, because then you'd actually have to try a teeny tad harder. Which brings to another one, which I feel like if you're looking at a design standpoint, you're probably going to disagree with me. But if you've played the game, you're probably not going to disagree with me. And that's a pillated snagret, because I'm slapping him right. Get right in C tier. Because he's just a big bitch. Most of the time you encounter him in the game. Like in the main game, you see him in those sandpit rooms, which is just hell. And fighting him and seeing him in general is just like it doesn't really feel like it's hard because he's a hard boss. But again, I'm used to no Pikmin runs. This guy is just a blight. It's almost a guaranteed reset unless I happen to actually remember where he pops up. And of course, the footage for him in the challenge room is the one room where he isn't in a pitfall room. And lo and behold, if you look at that, it was easy. He does look super cool, though. He does genuinely look super cool. So as much as I hate him, he looks cool enough for me to at least bump him up into C tier. Which after that, I'm going to start with our boy, the little globulon on pin rollers, the water wraith. And if you look at it, and this one again, if you take into account where he comes from, the main thing is a submerged castle. That's where that whole cave is designed to be his. It kind of resembles how I feel the cave system should have worked, where they all revolved around the boss of the cave. That way you have this really powerful theme and this build up to this momentous end. If you take into account, you see him a couple different times. Of course, in challenges, there's challenges designed specifically for him. You see him a couple other times in the game itself after the submerged castle. So if we take all those into consideration, after all this comes to everybody's favorite, the man wanted for murder in 58 of the 50 states. The man There we are. It brings us to the Cropster. Now, the Cropster itself, I kind of like it because, again, he doesn't have a build-up like the water wraith does, like I just mentioned. There's no, like, massive, momentous build-up to him. And he's another one of those big arena bosses with a gimmick you can kind of game a little bit. But even with the falling rocks, adds another little extra layer to it, so it's not as easy as the Blister is. So he's this nice, fun, good boss. He's got a nice little gimmick to him that isn't just cheesable. It is kind of cheesable, but it's less cheesy than super cheesable. And not to mention, he has a cool design. He's one of the few bosses in the game you can't just rail into him for and take him down. Funnily enough, similar to the King Breadbug himself. And funnily enough, from there, I'm going to put him right next to him, actually. I'm putting him in A tier. I like the Cropster. He's got a decent enough design. The colors, I know, obviously a little simple. And then, even if you look at him objectively, he looks a little goofy. But the way that it interacts with that build in-game is just nice and fun. I think he's a nice little fresh. Which, after that, brings us along to the man at the end of the whole Heroes. And he's like an easier form of the Beady long legs. Like his head's that much bigger. You can just hit his head that much quicker. It's so easy to take him out. Like, obviously, yeah, he freaking throws off and he freaking craves out and he freaking starts stomping all over the place and going crazy and ham. But, like, you just back away and you watch him. It's like you're watching a person have a tantrum in the middle of, like, a target. He's just sitting there freaking out on the floor and you're just like, okay. He's got a better design than Beady Longlegs does. He looks cooler than he does. In theory, crush your Pikmin easier, but if you're on top of your game, even a little bit, you're not going to have to worry about it. So I'll just put him in C tier. He's got weird pubes on the top of his head. Which brings us to the final boss, the Titan Dweevil. The one guy that you actually have to worry about a little bit, and that might actually catch you off guard the first time you play him. He's the one boss that actually requires you to have a genuine strategy. You know, because most people you talk to, you're going to target the electricity. You're basically going to knock off bits and parts to him as you go along. You have to vent from the water cannon. He's the one boss in the game that really introduces multiple different threats that you have to think about from just him. And because of that, I love him being phenomenal at the end. I love the fact that good old bitch head Louie's right on the top of him. Everything about this boss was made to be beautiful. And granted, having said that, weirdly enough, I'm still going to put him below the water wraith. Even though I love him that much, nothing will instill fear into a Pikmin 2 player quicker than the sounds of falling pins. You play that sound, you're going to catch it. If you play that sound in a public area, you will immediately know every Pikmin 2 player. And there we go. I want to keep it short and simple just because this one doesn't really need as much explanation as the previous ones did, because we're just looking at the bosses and not really much else. So that, I think we have... Just... Hold on. What are these? Keeps going down.
Oh no!